How are you guys doing? Today is Sunday, May 2nd, 2021, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, because today is Paul George's 31st birthday, I'm going to do an individual profile on his career, which is basically going to sum up all of his accolades and career accomplishments from the beginning of his career up until now to show what separates Paul George from all the other amazing players in the NBA. He's an elite NBA talent. And if you're unaware with who he is a 6'8", 220-pound forward for the Los Angeles Clippers. Probably one of the better all-around players in the NBA. Recognized for his offensive and his defensive talent. He's one of the he's a player that's been on a lot of amazing teams, and he is probably going to be one of the reasons why the Clippers make it incredibly far in the playoffs this year. If you don't know Paul George's story, he's originally from Palmdale, which is not far from Los Angeles itself. And high school, he would establish himself as one of the best young high school players in all of Los Angeles. He would establish himself as a good enough player to eventually go to Fresno State, of course. So he would get the option to get some playing time in his career, in his college career. In his very first season at Fresno State, his freshman year. In 2008, 2009, he would start 34 games in a season where Fresno State would go on and finish with the season they finished with a 13-21 record, but Paul George in the season would go on to average 14.3 points, 6.2 rebounds, just under 2 assists, 1.7 steals, and just a block, while averaging 34 minutes a game. And in his freshman year in his freshman year, he would establish himself as one of the better players in the Western Athletic Conference. His second year at Fresno State, he would start 29 games in a season where they would end up going 15-18. They still had a losing record, but this season, Paul George would see his minutes stay at about the same, about 33 minutes, but his points would increase to about 16.8. He see his rebounds tick up to about 7.2. He averaged 3 assists, 2.2 steals. He saw his blocks per game decrease a little bit, but it wasn't that bad. He saw his field goal percentage drop from 47% to 42% as he took two more shots a game. He was shooting. He would go on to shoot 35% from three, which was less than 44% the freshman year, but he would also go on to shoot 90% from the free throw line. As his volume scoring increased, the Fresno State Bulldogs got a little bit better, but of course they wouldn't establish himself as a good enough college team for Paul George to actually do anything with his college career. But in his second year, he would finish he would make the second team all WAC, and his number 24 would eventually be retired by the Fresno State Bulldogs after he established himself as a good enough prospect to be taken with the 10th overall pick in the 2010 NBA draft following his 2 seasons in college. And he would be drafted by the Indiana Pacers, and by the time he was drafted on the Pacers, they were a really good team that was kind of in and out of the playoffs a bit. Actually, they weren't. By the time they had drafted him, the last time they made the playoffs was 2005, 2006, and this was 2 years after Danny Granger had won the Most Improved Player. And as soon as Paul George joined the Indiana Pacers, they became a team that only missed the playoffs in 2014, 2015. So, in Paul George's very first season, in his age 20 season in 2010, 2011, he would start 19 of the 61 games he would play in a season where the Pacers finished with a 37-45 record. They had the 8th best record in the Eastern Conference, but of course that was a lot better than they did the previous year. They won 5 more games than they did the previous season, in which they finished with the 10th best record and missed. In the 61 games he played, he averaged 7 points, 4 rebounds, just over an assist, and he still averaged a steal per game while averaging 20.7 minutes. The Indiana Pacers, after finishing with the 8th best record in the league, they would end up losing in the first round to the Chicago Bulls in 2011. This is the year that the Bulls would eventually lose to the Heat, and the Heat would lose to the Dallas Mavericks in the final. I mean, Paul George, as a rookie, you wouldn't see as much production from him, but you'd see him start to play more and more. This was the last season in which his rookie year was the only season in which he did not start every single game of the season. the last time he came off the bench was actually his rookie year, and ever since he's really kind of established himself as one of the better players. But first he had to do so on the Pacers team. In his second season, his age 21 season in 2012, he would start all 66 games he would play in the lockout season, in which the Indiana Pacers would finish with a 42-24 record. He played every single game, as they finished with the third best record in the Eastern Conference. This is the year that Larry Bird won Executive of the Year. In the season, Paul George would see his minutes increase from 20.7 to 29.7. And in playing 9 more minutes a game, he would see his points increase from 7.8 to 12.1. He'd see his rebounds increase from 3.7 to 5.6. His assists increase from 1.1 to 2.4. His steals increase from 1 to 1.6. His blocks increased from 0.4 to 0.6. He took 3 more shots a game, as he saw his field goal percentage drop from about 45% to 44. He shot 1 more 3-pointer a game, as he saw his 3-point percentage shoot up from 29.7 to 38.5. And then he would go on to shoot 80% from the free throw line for the first time in his career, as he saw himself averaging double digits for the first time. And people would see him taking a little bit of a step forward as his playing time increased, his impact increased for the 2011-2012 season. They would go on to beat the Magic in the first round in 5 games, but they would lose to the Miami Heat in the semifinals, the season where the Miami Heat would go on and win their first title with LeBron James in their team. But many people were starting to become aware of Paul George. And in his third year back, many people started to see this is when many people started to see Paul George cross over the threshold into being one of the better players in the NBA. In his third season, his age 22 season, his third season in the NBA, he would start all 79 games that he would play in a season where the Pacers finished with a 49-32 record. They have the third best record in the Eastern Conference, and since their last full season, that is a 12-win increase. As of course, many people were starting to become aware that the Pacers were starting to become one of the better teams. This is when Danny Granger was still playing really well, and this is when Roy Hibbert started to really play in his element. Paul George would see his minutes increase from 29.7 to 37.6, as he would see this 5-minute increase. This would be the very first season that Paul George would become an all-star. He would win the most improved player in the NBA, as he saw his points per game increase from 12.1 to 17.4 with this 8-minute increase. His rebounds per game went from 5.6 to 7.6. His assists went from 2.4 to 4.1. His steals increased from 1.6 to 1.8. As he took 5 more shots a game, he saw his field goal percentage dip from about 44 to 42%. He saw his threes dip from 38 to 36%, as he took 2.5 more 3-point attempts per game. And he saw his free throw percentage stay at about 80.7. And he would go on to make his very first All-Star game, as he helped the Indiana Pacers go all the way to the NBA Finals, where they would end up losing to the Miami Heat in 7 games. And they would go on to lose. This Miami Heat team would go on to win the championship. So this is the second year in a row they would lose to the Miami Heat in the playoffs, before the Miami Heat would go on to take the title for themselves. But, of course, many people were starting to become aware of how impactful Paul George was as a player. And Paul George's next season, his 4th season in the NBA, 2013-2014, his age 23 season, he would start all 80 of the games that he would play in a season where the Pacers finished with a 56-26 record. That was the best record in the Eastern Conference as a whole. And they would win 7 more games than they did the previous season. Going into the playoffs, they of course were the favorites they were the favorites to make it to the finals. In the regular season, Paul George would see his minutes per game he would average 1 less minute per game, as he averaged 36 minutes. He would see his points per game go up from 17 to 21.7. This would be the first time Paul George would average 20 points per game in his career. He saw his rebounds tick down from 7.6 to 6.8. His assists went down from 4.1 to 3.5. His steals went up a tick from 1.8 to 1.9. His blocks went down from 0.6 to 0.3. As he took 2 more shots a game, he saw his field goal percentage jump up from 41.9 to 42.4. His 3-point percentage stayed at about 36, and then he saw his free throw percentage jump up from 80.7 to 86.4. This will be the first time he shot at least 85% from the foul line. And after being named an All-Star for the second time in his 4th season in the NBA, the Pacers would go on to beat the Hawks in the first round in 7. They beat the Wizards in 6. And then they would go on to lose to the Miami Heat in the conference finals. This would be the 3rd time in a row they would lose to the Miami Heat before the Miami Heat went to the finals. But in 2013-14, the Miami Heat would end up losing to the San Antonio Spurs, just to give a little bit of context. But that's just to show you how close the Indiana Pacers were. They were one team away 3 years in a row, and that one team just happened to be the Miami Heat. And in 2013-2014, he was able to make the All-NBA 3rd team. And in 2013, Paul George would make the All-Defensive 2nd team for the first time in his career. And in 2014, he would make the All-Defensive 1st team for the first time in his career, the second time he made an All-Defensive team. And following the 2013-14 season, Paul George would play in a matchup for, I believe, the FIBA basketball tournament. And in that summer, Paul George would actually break his leg, which would knock him out of the 2014-15 season completely. I mean, he would play 6 games in a season where the Indiana Pacers would finish with a 38-44 record. They lost 18 more games than they did the previous season, and they were completely out of the playoff picture with Paul George only playing 6 minutes. He would only average 15 minutes, averaging about 8 points, 3 rebounds, and 1 assist a game. As, of course, like I said, him not even being there led to the Indiana Pacers not making the playoffs, just to show a little bit more just to what his impact was on that team. But, of course, he would come back incredibly strong. In 2015-2016, his age 25 season in the NBA, he would start all 81 games for a Indiana Pacers team that finished with a 45-37 record. That was 7 more wins than they had won the previous season when Paul George wasn't there. While coming back, he would average 34.8 minutes per game, which is the least amount of minutes he's averaged since he's been an All-Star. And in his 3rd full season since he was named an All-Star for the first time, he would be named an All-Star yet again. He would see his points per game shoot up to 23.1, the highest in his career. You see his rebounds per game shoot up to about 7, his assists per game to 4.1, tied for the highest in his career. At that point, he averaged 1.9 steals per game. This would be the 4th time in his career he averaged at least 1.5. 5th time he averaged at least 1 steal per game. He would shoot 17.9 field goal attempts per game, which is the most in his career up until that point. He shot 41.8% from the field. He shot 37% from 3 while shooting 7 threes a game, which up until then was the highest 3-point percentage he had shot in a season where he had shot at least 3.5 or 4 threes per game. He would go on to shoot 86% from the foul line as in addition to being named an All-Star. He would go on to be named to the All-NBA 3rd team for the 3rd time in 4 straight years and his 3rd straight full season for the Indiana Pacers. He would also go on to make the All-Defensive 2nd team for the 2nd time in his career, and he has not made the All-Defensive 2nd team since that year. And once the Pacers would make it to the playoffs, they would lose in the very first round to the Toronto Raptors. And this is the season that this would be the 2nd season in which the Golden State Warriors would take the Cavs to the finals. This is the season where the Cavs would beat the Warriors in the finals, for a little bit of context. But of course, when Paul George came back, they would make the playoffs. This would lead to Paul George's final season with Indiana, which would be his 7th season in the NBA, his age 26 season. He would start all 75 of the games that he would play in a season where the Indiana Pacers finished with a 42-40 record. They had won 3 less games than they had the previous season, but they had still finished with the seventh best record in the entire Eastern Conference. In Paul George's final season in Indiana, he would see his minutes per game go up to about 36, and in the season, he would see his points per game go up from 23.1 to 23.7. His career high up until that point, with the Indiana Pacers. He averaged 6.6 rebounds, just a tick lower than he did the previous season. 3.3 assists, which is lower than the previous season. 1.6 assists, which is lower than the previous season. He would take the same amount of shots per game, but he would see his field goal percentage shoot up from 41.8 to 46.1. He'd see his three-point percentage shoot up from 37 to 39, and he would also see his free throw percentage shoot up from 86% from 89.8, as he was seeing more of his shots go in. He would be named an All-Star for the fourth time in that 5-year stretch. All four of the full seasons he had played since he was first named an All-Star, he was named an All-Star with the Indiana Pacers. And in addition to that, the Indiana Pacers would go on to lose to the Cavaliers in the very first round of the playoffs before the Cavaliers would go to the finals and lose to the Warriors in Kevin Durant's first season. For a little bit more context, and after Kevin Durant had left Oklahoma City and Russell Westbrook was he was Oklahoma City's lone All-Star for the season where he won the MVP. In that offseason, Paul George would eventually join Russell Westbrook in Oklahoma City. He would join them in the 2017-18 season, in his 8th season for Oklahoma City. And Paul George's first season with the Thunder, he would start all 79 games that he would play in a season where the Oklahoma City Thunder would finish with a 48-34 record, which actually won them one more game than they had the previous season in which Russell Westbrook won the MVP. And in those seasons, Paul George would, of course, make his 5th All-Star appearance in 6 seasons, his 5th All-Star appearance in the last 5 full seasons that he played. That's a half decade straight of consistently making the All-Star team. He would average almost one more minute than he did in his last season in Indiana. He would see his points per game average dip a little bit from 23.7 to 21.9, but this would go on to be the 4th full season in a row in which he averaged 20 points per game. He averaged 5.7 rebounds, 3.3 assists. He averaged 2 steals per game. The first time in his career he averaged at least 2 steals per game. He averaged half a block. He averaged 1 less shot per game, averaging 17 field goal attempts per game, but he shot 43% from the field. He shot 40% from 3. This is the first full season in which he shot 40% from 3 for an entire season. And then he would shoot 82% from the line. And once they made the playoffs, the Oklahoma City Thunder would actually lose in the very first round to the Jazz, as Donovan Mitchell was coming of age, especially around this really talented Jazz lineup. But following this season, Paul George would come back for a second season. But originally in that first season, Paul George would make the All-NBA third team with the Thunder for the 4th and most recent time that he's been able to do so in his career. And this would lead, of course, into Paul George's second and last season with the Oklahoma City Thunder. In 2018-19, he would start all 77 of the games that he would play in a season where the Oklahoma City Thunder would finish with a 49-33 record. They had one more win than the previous season. So, of course, they had one win increases in both the years that they had Paul George on their team. In this season, Paul George would see his minutes per game stayed about the same, but he would see his points per game increase from 21.9 to 28. This would be the first time in his career that Paul George averaged at least 24. So the fact that he had 28, that's the most he's ever averaged in a season to date. He averaged 8.2 rebounds per game, which is the most rebounds in a season he's ever averaged. He averaged 4.1 assists, which was tied with 2013 and 2016 for the most assists he's had in a season. He averaged 2.2 steals per game, the second time he has averaged at least 2 steals per game. And this is the only time in his career in which he's led the NBA in steals. while shooting 21 shots per game, he was able to increase his field goal percentage from 43 to 43.8, just a tad. His three-point percentage went down a tick to 38.6, and then you would see his free throw percentage increase from 82.2 to 83.9, as he would go on as Paul George would make his sixth All-Star appearance in 7 seasons in his last 6 full seasons in the NBA. This would be the second time he made it as a Western Conference player. And once the Oklahoma City, or before they made it to the playoffs, Paul George would be named to the All-NBA first team for the only time in his career. And like I said, that was his 6th time being named an All-Star. And following this season, the Oklahoma City Thunder would eventually lose in 5 to the Trailblazers off of an amazing shot from Damian Lillard. Nonetheless, that was Paul George's curtain call with the Oklahoma City Thunder organization. Following this season, Paul George would take his talents back to his home city of Los Angeles. He would join the Los Angeles Clippers, and in 2019-2020, he would start all 48 of the games that he would play in a season where the Los Angeles Clippers would finish with a 49-23 season, which was heavily impacted by the Corona-19 virus. It cut the season short in the very middle of the season, and of course they had to finish the season with an 8-game play-in season, whatever, in Orlando. But the Los Angeles Clippers finished with a 49-23 record. That was the second best record in the Western Conference, as he and Kawhi Leonard did happen to team up and become one of the most powerful tandems in the NBA. In this regular season, Paul George would miss the playoffs because of his injuries, but in the season, he would see his minutes per game shoot down from 36 to about 29, but he would still average 21.5 points per game. This would be the 5th consecutive year in which he averaged 20, the 6th consecutive full season in which he's averaged 21 points per game. He went on to average 5.7 rebounds, still 3.9 rebounds, just over a steal as well. He would see his field goal attempts drop from 21 on Oklahoma City to 16.3, but he still shot about 43% from the field. He saw his 3-point percentage shoot up to 41.2, the highest in his career the highest in his career through a full season up until this date. And he went on to shoot 87% from the foul line, which is the second highest he'd ever shot in a full season in his career. Even though he was unable to make an all-star team, the Clippers would go on to make it pretty far in the playoffs. They would beat the Mavericks 4-2 in the very first round in the Orlando playoff series, and then they would end up losing in the conference semifinals to the Nuggets after they were originally up 3-1 in the series. The Nuggets would come back and officially defeat the Clippers to knock them out of the playoffs. And that's, of course, how the Clippers were unable to win the championship this last playoff stretch. But coming into this season, looking at where Paul George currently stands, right now the Clippers are currently holding on to one of the top records in the NBA. They have the 3rd best record in the Western Conference, as right now they are getting ready to face the Toronto Raptors on Tuesday. As this team looks very formidable to jump right back into the playoffs. Looking at how Paul George is faring in the 48 games he's played so far, he's averaging 23 points, 6.5 rebounds, just over 5 assists, and just over a steal and half a block, while averaging about 33 minutes a game, shooting 47% from the field, 42% from 3, so far the highest he's ever shot from the field and from 3 in his career, while also shooting 87% from the line while playing for a formidable Los Angeles Clippers team that looks as though they could jump right back into the title push. He was also named an all-star for the 7th year in a row this season, and not to mention this man has also won a gold medal at the 2016 Olympics in Rio de Janeiro, and that kind of leads us to where we are now. An incredible player who is now just turning to 31. I don't believe he's very far. I don't believe that there will be. I don't believe that he's going to fall out of this elite level anytime soon. I think he's playing incredible basketball. I think his best basketball is definitely ahead of him. And I want to thank everyone once again for listening to all 25 minutes of this piece. I hope all is well. Once again, today is Sunday, May 2nd, 2021 out here in this quarantine. I want to wish Paul George a happy 31st birthday. And I will catch everyone with another installment of The Elite right after this. Once again, thanks for listening to this piece. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Peace out.